Hey, welcome. This is Chapter 9, Section 4. This is Part 1. We're going to have the second part tomorrow. But let's go ahead and get started. This is reforming the industrial world. We've talked about the Industrial Revolution. We've talked about its spread now, and we've talked about all the horrible working conditions and how horrible it was to sort of live through it, especially in the beginning. Well, some people realized it is actually really horrible. We should do something about this. So let's talk about some of the first people to start talking about it, the philosophers of industrialization. The way things were going is what we call laissez-faire economics. It's French for let do or let the people do as they please. A lot of times it's interpreted as hands-off. Laissez-faire, the economic policy that government should not interfere with business or trade, that trade and business will coincide with what is best for society if we leave it alone. One of the first major proponents of laissez-faire is a very important dude named Adam Smith. He's a professor at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and he is really big on free markets. He writes a book called The Wealth of Nations, and he believes that economic liberty or economic freedom is what is going to guarantee economic progress, that you will move forward as a country if you have the freedom for people to do as they please economically. He also says that society and the economy will follow these three natural laws. Number one, self-interest. People work for their own good, that you work for money for you, to buy things for you and to do things, not to work for someone and then, give all your money away. Number two, competition. That competition forces people to make a better product. If I sell shoes and I charge you $50 and someone else sells shoes and they're the exact same as mine, but they charge you $40, you're going to go there. Okay, so I'm going to have to compete with that person and either make a better product or make a cheaper product for you to want to buy my product. Then the last law is supply and demand. He says that because of that competition, enough goods would be produced at the lowest possible price to meet market demand in a market economy. So if I'm making shoes for $50 and you make the exact same shoes for $60, no one's going to buy them. That if you make those same shoes for $40, then I'm going to try to make those same shoes for $35. And eventually, according to this law, that product will be sold for the absolute cheapest it can be. And that is pretty much what happened in the Industrial Revolution. However, the problem was, as you'll see, selling it for the absolute cheapest means you can't pay people very much. So that leads us to capitalism. You're living in it. An economic system in which land and resources, which are often called the factors of production, are privately owned, and money is invested in businesses by private individuals to make a profit, a private profit. All right, the economists of capitalism, three guys you need to know: Smith, Malthus, and Ricardo. So Adam Smith, he's the grandfather. He's the one that everybody looks to. He talks about those three natural laws. The next guy is a guy named Thomas Malthus. He's actually a population scientist, and he puts forth the ideas that populations grow faster than the food supply can sustain. He says we need wars, we need epidemics to kill off the extra people. Sounds horrible. Or there will be misery and poverty. So this is putting forward that war and disease is a natural part of life, and we need it. Otherwise, our population will get out of control. Instead of trying to fight off, wars and fight off diseases, we should, welcome them as the things that are going to reduce our population. David Ricardo envisions that there will always be a permanent poor underclass providing cheap labor. And he says until there are fewer of those people, okay, and labor is scarce or resources are scarce, the poor will remain poor. If there are 100 people fighting for one job, that job will go to the person who will take the least amount of money. That's just logical. However, if there's one job and only one guy, Okay, you're going to pay that guy whatever he wants so that he will do that job. Laissez-faire thinkers like Smith, Malthus, Ricardo, they are opposed to any kind of government intervention to help the poor. They are against minimum wage laws. They are against any law that legislates better working conditions. They are against restrictions on age, hours, or who should work and where they should work. And they believe that any of those kind of laws, any regulation whatsoever by the government, is going to upset that free market system and is going to slow down progress and the production of wealth in the country. So let's talk about our next little subsection, the rise of socialism. Socialism is an economic and social system in which the factors of production, that land, labor, resources, are owned by the people who work in the factory. So if you work in the factory, you are also an owner of the factory. So when the factory makes money, everyone who works there splits the profit, as opposed to the owner of the factory making the profit and simply cutting you a paycheck. The idea being that if you own the factory, it's in your best interest to work very hard and to gain as much profit for the factories to increase your portion. Are you ever going to get crazy rich because, you only own a small portion? No, you're not going to get crazy rich. But everyone who works there is going to do well as long as the factory does well. That's the theory. Socialists believe that the government should be involved in regulating the economy to bring equality to people and to end poverty, that it is government's job to get involved in the economy. It is government's job to get involved in business and trade, and that if government does and imposes these regulations, it'll end this kind of horrific poverty and horrible working conditions that we see in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The next little area we're talking about is the next sort of economic theory that comes up is utilitarianism. And that is a theory put forth by Jeremy Bentham in the 1700s. And what it does is it judges anything, a factory, a law, any policy, anything by its usefulness to everyone. He says that any government policy should try to, quote, promote the most good for the greatest number of people. Actually, there is Jeremy Bentham. That's his mummy. When he died, he willed his body to a science at I think the University of the Centre of London, UCL. And so he is in a big wooden box there. There's a glass front. After a while, his head fell off, so they put it down there by his feet and put a wax head up there because his head is all mummified. But he volunteered his body for mummification for the purposes of science. So you can go see him. Field trip. All right. The next guy you need to know, John Stuart Mill. He is, a little bit after Bentham. He's in the 1800s. And he believes that having a permanently poor working class on the edge of starvation is wrong. And he wants to create more economic and political equality. And one of the things that he's in favor of is women's suffrage, because he believes that if women have the vote, then you are going to see more reforms aimed especially at children and etc. That he believes that women are less concerned with making money than men are. I guess some are. This is fun. All right. Robert Owen takes all of those utilitarian ideas and puts them sort of together and actually tries to go for it. He takes these beginning of these socialist theories and he puts them into practice. He owns a mill in a town called New Lanark, Scotland, and he builds next to his mill this tiny little town. He has houses. He builds nice, clean houses. The people who work in his mill get affordable rent for his on those houses. There are no kids allowed in the factory, and there is a free school for the community. It's supposed to be, the idea of you live where you work and you take pride in that. You take pride in the factory, etc. And then eventually what he does is when the mill is up and running, he gives the mill to the workers. They own it. He gives it away. And so they own it together communally. And this is actually quite successful. This is his mill there. You can see there's mill 2, mill 3. There's the water center, mill wheel. He's got a school. He's got his own house. It's mill workers' house, village store. There's a park, and then you see where it says the Rose. That's where all the places where the other factory workers lived, etc. So it was actually very successful. So when the mill was successful, the workers split the profits. And it's very successful in Scotland. And so he founds another one in New Harmony, Indiana in 1825. And he called it Utopianism. He wanted this community to be a utopia. Which is a good idea. All right, some other guys. Charles Fourier and Saint-Simon saw all those problems of industrialization, of 5-year-olds getting their hands ripped off, and then being fired, and people not being able to feed their kids, and thought that this new theory, this socialism, could solve those problems. And this is sort of what we were talking about earlier. If factory workers owned the factory and they shared in the profits, then they would have a higher standard of living. They would own the factors of production and not just their labor. So you wouldn't be working for a paycheck. You would be working for a cut of the profits. Socialism is a fairly optimistic view. It's an optimistic view of people, and it would be great if people weren't people. Socialism is optimistic. It's a belief in progress. It's also a concern for social justice. Socialists argued that a planned economy, planned by the government, will ensure equality for everyone and will benefit everyone rather than the few who have the money to own a factory and start up a factory benefiting. And that's what a free market usually does. So socialists wanted the government to own all major industries like factories, mines, railroads, anything that the people needed, anything that the government or the country needed to survive, all major industries. Now, the idea is if the government owns the industries and theoretically the people own the government, okay, not a king, but the people, like, say, in England where you vote for parliament and the king by this point is, or the queen by this point is king or queen is just a constitutional monarch. So if you vote for your representatives and they make decisions for you, then theoretically you own the government. And if you own the government and the government owns a company, you own the company. Then the profits for the company go back into the government, which should control and make sure that no one is eating dirt poor. Now, the flip coin to this is no one will be Bill Gates rich. Everyone will be somewhere in the middle, which sounds great if it worked. It doesn't always work because, unfortunately, people suck. So, coming up, part 2, we're going to talk about the real socialism that with our guys in the party hats. We're going to talk about Karl Marx and Engels and Lenin. All right? I will see you tomorrow.